they're like, we're going to figure out who'd possibly threaten us throughout all of time, and we're going to take them out before Stephen Strange is the the Sorcerer Supreme or anything.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we like to democratize the film criticism community and conversation by talking to fans and critics alike, bringing on a different guest every episode to talk about a movie of their choice. So this week, I am joined by Zach Mathews of the Proper Gentleman Podcast. How's it going, Zach?
Hey, Rob. I'm good. How are you?
So I'm doing great. I am really looking forward to talking about this movie. It's actually being particularly timed to a related film, but we'll get into that in a second. So it's interesting how you and I connected. So you actually, you and I got connected over social media.
Yep.
Not even Twitter. You would think normally a lot of people that I talk with on Twitter. So you reached out to me over LinkedIn.
Yep.
And then I think you told me about your podcast, and we just kind of, I guess, the conversation kind of turned to our side hustles, as it were.
Yeah.
So could you tell people a little bit about what your show is and why they should check it out?
Yeah, for sure. So the Proper Gentleman Podcast is a podcast that me and four of my best friends founded. We're childhood friends, so we just kind of it's just kind of a natural back and forth that we have. But the main topic of the podcast is just to kind of hang out round table style and talk about all things pop culture with a heavy focus on the nostalgia aspect of the topics that we cover. So, like, for example, we did a few weeks back, we did a Pokemon episode, the first 150. So we focused on Pokemon Red and Blue, and then we've done episodes like our favorite comic book movies and things like that. So it's a good time. You should check. I mean, it's just if you like a broad cover of a topic and laughs along the way, then you should definitely check it out.
And that's the thing too. I think with podcasts these days, there's so many niche podcasts that focus specifically on, comic book properties or Star Wars or whatever. That I think it's cool that you guys, as far as the topics are concerned, you're a little looser with that, where it just whatever you kind of feel like talking about gets wrapped onto the show, but it's really the main consistent draw is the chemistry amongst all of you and sort of so the people listening, it's basically like hanging out with a bunch of friends every time you listen to an episode. And I think that's really cool that you guys do that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's the main idea, is that you're a fly on the wall to the conversation. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it gives you the freedom to bring in whether it's a big movie or something personal and things like that. So that's cool. So definitely check them out. Where can people find the podcast?
Pretty much anywhere they get their podcast fix. So, we're up on iTunes, on Spotify. I don't know the other ones offhand, but pretty much anywhere you want to listen to a podcast. I think we're on SoundCloud too. So, and then you can check out our website too, propergentlemanpodcast.com. All the episodes are listed on there.
Great. So wherever you're listening to the Crooked Table Podcast, you most likely can find the Proper Gentleman Podcast just by searching for it.
That's right.
So when we connected and you actually filled out the form on the website, just because formality, I guess, of all of that. So what I guess we could just mention, we're going to talk about Captain America: The Winter Soldier. So before we get into why you picked that, let's listen to a little bit of the trailer right now.
We're going to neutralize a lot of threats before they even happen.
Thought the punishment usually came after the crime.
S.H.I.E.L.D. takes the world as it is, not as we'd like it to be.
This isn't freedom. This is fear.
You need to keep both eyes open.
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
So that was a little bit of the trailer for Captain America: The Winter Soldier, directed by Joe and Anthony Russo. So, what made this your go-to film that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite Marvel movies of all time, and I think what makes it so great is Chris Evans as Captain America. He's such a believable Captain America, In fact, so much so that he's probably a Captain America in real life without the superpowers. I mean, just a few weeks ago at the Oscars, he's getting all this notice, all these notice for helping, one of the winners up the stairs because of her dress. So, I mean, it makes him lovable, and it makes the stories the storylines are just killer. So, but this one especially, it's probably my favorite because it starts to take the Marvel Cinematic Universe into a very serious turn. Whereas, up until that, it was like this very brightly colored, superpower team type feel. It starts to make it more tactical, and there's more diabolical plots behind it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the most grounded, probably still as far as within the MCU, but
for sure,
definitely up to this point. I mean, you had a little bit of that with Iron Man, but even Iron Man, it's kind of the Batman thing that it's like, it's because he has all this crazy technology. Captain America is just, he's taken out of time and all of that, but for the most part, he's just basically a strong guy, pretty much.
Yeah.
He's just really fast and agile and things like that. So yeah, no, I agree with a lot of what you said there. I think that this film, first of all, Chris Evans, to that point, just, if you follow him on social media or you see anything, he just seems to be like a really like down to earth, like, salt of the earth kind of guy.
Absolutely.
Very much kind of embodying the humility and like strength and all that embodies Captain America, which is why whenever I hear things, whenever I see headlines, it's like John Cena wants to play Captain America, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know
No,
about that. You just get like a strong guy. There's a little more to it than that. There's more humanity to the character,
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, I feel like he's probably, because of that, he's probably one of the more relatable of the core Avengers. Because he's not a billionaire or a spy or a god. He's this scrawny little kid from Brooklyn who was lucky enough to get these abilities and, serve his country in the way that he wanted to, even when he really was physically unable.
Yep. Bound and determined. And that's what, that's ultimately what brought him to the powers. And to your point, it just makes him that much more relatable. And he has his own battles, which I think is the big draw for this, is that he just kind of learns along the way. He gets these powers, and even in The Winter Soldier, you start to see him like learn more of like the fighting style that Captain America is known for, where up until that point, it was like this brute, like punching, just kind of using his powers however he could. Now he's starting to like strategize and turn into the Captain America that we know today.
Well, and also, I think in a lot of ways, The Winter Soldier, not only does it bring him into the modern context, like narratively, I guess Avengers does a little bit, but that's such a focused story that it doesn't really delve into what it's like for him to now be 70 plus years displaced from his own time.
Yep.
The character, I think, really comes into his own in a way that we hadn't seen in the other two movies. You know what I mean? Well, the first one is a period piece, and so it's really about him trying to find a way to do some good while also kind of being this propaganda prop in a lot of ways. Just playing the USO shows and on the on his downtime actually fighting battles and kind of being taken seriously. And then Avengers, he's just a foil for Tony Stark, and he doesn't really have. You don't really get to know him in a current, in a modern day context until this movie. And I think the fact that I really like the element of the fact that he is from a simpler time, kind of confronted with these much more morally complex age in which we live. And there's a lot of, post 9/11 kind of paranoia, and, we'll get into more of the influence of the film and stuff in a few minutes. But
sure.
So what is your history with this film? Like, did you see it when it came out in theaters, and were you struck by it immediately, or has it taken time to kind of grow, your appreciation to grow?
Sure. So I saw it in theaters, and I can remember why this movie stood out to me so much. It probably got amplified because, Avengers came out, and I was all about I was on board, like I was convinced, but I was concerned, I'm like, where do they go from here? Cause I know they have this big MCU planned out, but does it get much better than that? You know what I mean? And, so you see Iron Man 3 comes out, and I don't want to speak for you, but I wasn't impressed with it. And then, Thor Dark World comes out, after that. Again, not impressive. It wasn't a bad movie, but
I think just to that point, I think Iron Man 3, I think it's fair to say, is very divisive. Like there's either people that really like it or people that really don't like it. And I think a lot of that has to do with your familiarity with the source material and things like that. Like people that knew the Mandarin, I think, came into that movie being pissed off about the big twist. And those that were just seeing it as a movie were just like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. But Thor the Dark World, I think, is generally considered one of the weakest in the MCU. So I agree. I think Winter Soldier, it was really up to them to legitimize the post-Avengers landscape going forward. And then Guardians came out after and helped out even more.
Oh yeah. And that's what got me back on board, and this was the first movie that the Russo brothers directed. So, who have obviously played a big role ever since. They did Civil War. They did the two, Infinity War and Endgame. So they just did a really good job of scaling it back down from the Avengers, this all-encompassing movie into, a scaled-down version, but it's still believable that the adversaries that he faces in Winter Soldier, could take over the world. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and from what I've read, it was a real conscious effort on the part of the Russos to not bring Red Skull back, to really have it just be human villains and just undercover Hydra agents. And I think the only indulgence they really give themselves is Armin Zola, I forget his first name, but Zola, like consciousness on the on that computer screen. It's like the only,
right.
I think the only element of the movie that really embraces kind of the sci-fi aspect of it. Other than that, it is pretty grounded political thriller.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And then for me, when this came out, it's actually really funny. The exact release date for this film always really sticks out in my head because I didn't see it on opening day because I was getting married on April 4th, 2014, when this came out in theaters. So I actually made a meme that I posted on my personal Facebook after. It was like, oh, Miss Captain America 2 got married instead with a picture from my wedding. So because, my wife's actually favorite Avenger is Captain America. So we were really looking forward to seeing this. And then when we saw the release, they were like, oh, all right, well,
no,
week.
Of course, yeah.
this takes precedence. As a movie person, I'm like, damn! Right when that's coming out, can we push it a little? But yeah, so that was kind of my experience with it. And you in the first two appearances with Chris Evans, I guess if you count the cameo in Dark World, which is really funny and probably one of the highlights of that movie.
Yeah.
You get he just feels like just such a Boy Scout that there's not a lot of depth to him as a character as much in those first two. But then when this comes out and the contrast between his kind of black and white version of how things are, how things should be, and realizing that even S.H.I.E.L.D. is kind of working with, working from an agenda. As he has that whole conversation with Nick Fury about, oh, this isn't freedom, this is fear, that kind of thing, and that very much is they hinted at that a little bit in Avengers when him and Tony are individually investigating what S.H.I.E.L.D. is up to and how they want to harness the technology and all that.
Good point.
But they develop it a lot more here, and I think it's interesting that he's the one that ended up getting folded into the S.H.I.E.L.D. story because everybody else, Thor, Iron Man, have their own little pockets of the MCU, but Captain America doesn't. Like his whole purpose and mission is to fight a battle, and so this is the battle that he got kind of wrapped into. Yeah.
And it's so cool too because the man out of time aesthetic that you kind of touched on earlier, he kind of thinks that he left Hydra in the past. He hasn't seen him really since. He's had some hints at it, like you said, in Avengers, but then just all these skeletons that were in his closet, all these ghosts in his past that he thought were dead in the water, get brought back up in this movie, more than one. So, I mean, can you imagine, all the demons of your past coming back at one, perfect storm. So that, I mean, that just makes it that much more complicated of a storyline for me.
Yeah, and I think that the film really overall, I mean, this is a little slightly tangential from this specific movie, but just I feel like the Captain America trilogy really works as a progression of his character, because he starts out as that scrawny Brooklyn kid, I can do this all day, fighting in the alley, and then becomes Captain America, is brought into this this very clear battle of who's bad and who's good, enters a more complex age where all his past kind of unravels, and then in Civil War loses a lot of that because Peggy passes away, and Bucky is sort of being hunted down, and he's doubting whether or not Bucky is actually behind some of this at a certain point, and his the new family that he's kind of found himself in the Avengers is again breaking apart, to the point that at the end of it he just lays down his shield. So it's real rise and fall of Captain America as an identity, and kind of him struggling to reconcile who he is inside with the times that he lives in.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, he's forced to, ever since he got the powers, I feel like he's just been able to hide behind the mask and the shield. But to your point, he has to discover not only who Captain America is, but Steve Rogers is. Mm-hmm. You get bits and pieces of that, like when he's talking to Falcon in Winter Soldier. Falcon asks him, are you thinking of stepping away? You thinking of getting out of the game? And he's like, I don't know. What would I do? It's just little pieces like that lead up to him, like you said, slamming his shield in the ground and walking away.
Yeah. And we get a moment in Infinity War with Thor where he has all that stripped away. But I think in a lot of ways, Captain America is even more kind of a I don't know, a character that's really suffered so much loss. And it's interesting. I'm really looking forward probably the most in a way to see what Endgame has in store for him, just because he did get kind of short shrift in Infinity War, because the focus was really more on Iron Man and the Guardians and the whole thing with Thanos kind of paying off. Where that journey is supposedly going to end, because Chris Evans has announced that he's just retiring from the role, whether that means he gets killed or Steve Rogers just steps away. But again, what is he going to do? I don't know. We'll have to readdress that towards the end of the conversation, what we think the future holds for him. But
oh boy.
But I do think that it's a very clear through line that the character has kind of seen through these three movies and tied into the Avengers. And I think it helps that Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely are the same screenwriters for all three Cap movies and Infinity War and Endgame. So, and that's how you get cool little moments like I mentioned earlier, but the payoff from the moment in the first one, where at the end of Civil War he's fighting Tony Stark and he's like, I can do this all day, paying off from the beginning of the first movie. Little things like that to kind of bring it full circle. So this one picks up from the Avengers, and I guess not a whole lot of time has passed. It seems like he's just working with S.H.I.E.L.D, preparing for missions, training, that kind of thing.
I think you read it's 2 years after the events of the Avengers.
And he's been kind of laying low, I guess, because it's true. The MCU does more or less take place in real time. So from 2012 to 2014, when this film came out. So he's just, I think it ties into kind of what we were saying. I think he's working with S.H.I.E.L.D on their base, just kind of trying to live his life, going to getting groceries and flirting with his neighbor, and just kind of I don't know, I'm going on a mission because that's what I do. And then it's less, he doesn't have a Red Skull or an Ultron yet, or anything like that to face down. So he's just adjusting as much as he can to a normal life, which is funny that. Yeah, exactly. Which is funny because normal for him is still, his neighbor is still an undercover S.H.I.E.L.D agent. Yeah. So.
Yep. His normal life is walking into the music blaring and Nick Fury bloody on his sofa. Yeah,
exactly. So how did you feel about the way that this film picked up from the end of Avengers and kind of introduced us a little more to Steve Rogers' private life?
I think it was a cool aspect, because like I said, they're scaling it down. So really, what else would he be doing in all this time that, since the last time we've seen him, other than because he is essentially a noble war machine. That's all he knows. So, he's just kind of been thrashing about with Black Widow and Nick Fury, just kind of going on these side missions when they need him. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really cool idea. That he, like you said, he hasn't been fighting. There's not a Red Skull at every corner. There's not Ultron, just waiting for him every day. Sometimes it's the little battles that lead to the big ones.
Mm-hmm. And I really love that sequence too at the beginning, where they take on, I guess that's Batroc the Leaper from the comics, more or less. Is what that's supposed to be. That whole, like, that's where you really get a sense of like I was saying, in the other two movies, he's very much like, the leader, but like doesn't have as much personality and doesn't really kick ass quite in the same way. And then that sequence comes in Winter Soldier, and you're like, oh, they're taking this shit seriously now. Yeah. Where he's like, the stunt work is just astronomically better than the previous. Like you said, he was just kind of a brawler in the previous. Right. Here he's much more acrobatic and doing spins and things like that. And the fight choreography in this movie is probably still the strongest in all of the MCU.
I would agree.
And I think the a big part of that is the fact that you're dealing with someone who, like I said, isn't super powered really. I mean, he's strong and that kind of thing, but he's not, he's not an extraterrestrial. He's not the god of thunder or anything like that. So you get some really great sequences there. What did you think about that? Seeing that for the first time in theaters, and you're like, oh, Captain America movie, cool. This should be good. And then seeing the way that it's like almost John Wick level fight choreography happening. What was kind of your thoughts about that?
Oh, my mind was blown. I remember that because it opens up, and you get a little bit of a full circle thing, like you mentioned earlier, when he dives out of the ship without a parachute, he just, like you said, he kind of sets it up, and that's another thing too, is that he's been learning when he goes on these small missions with S.H.I.E.L.D. You can tell he's been training with them too, and that's what leads to the better fight scenes, but. I could just remember thinking to myself, all right, buckle up. This is going to be a completely different movie than what I thought when I walked into the theater. Because you just get so many different aspects of, and so many different chase scenes and fight scenes. And that's kind of a foreshadowing, for what's to come.
Mm-hmm. I think the action overall is much more realistic and visceral. I mean, really the only big action scene that has heavy CG, I guess, is towards the end with the all the helicarriers and things like that. But it just you do get a sense that this is kind of Cap like at his peak, like he's fully realized his abilities and has learned how to execute them in a much smoother fashion.
Yeah.
I also really like the decision of this movie. As we were saying, they don't really have his supporting cast is all back in 1941 or what 1940, like the World War II. So I think it was a smart move to pair him with Black Widow, not only because it does make sense narratively, because if he's working with S.H.I.E.L.D., that's obviously the one he's the agent he's closest with, but also just because their ideologies are so different.
Yes, yeah. I think Scarlett Johansson plays her best Black Widow in this movie. What do you think?
I think so too. I think you get a hint of how interesting a character she could be in Avengers, the first Avenger movie. But I think here, because she has Captain America to play off of, she still feels dangerous. She still feels a little bit like a wild card, even though she's a hero and she's on the side of good. You're always like kind of questioning how far she's going to go with it, and they toy with that a lot in this movie, where there's an interrogation scene. I think it's with Sitwell, and Captain America's like threatening to throw him off over a ledge of the side of a building or something, and he's like, "You wouldn't do it." And he's like, "Oh, I wouldn't," but she would. And then she kind of pushes him over, and Falcon catches him. That whole thing, because they play with the fact that she's willing to get her hands dirty. I mean, she's already got a lot of red in her ledger, she says in Avengers, and I think that it pushes him to sort of see the world not the way he wants it to be, but the way it really is a little bit. And I think he brings out a little bit of a better side in her, so that they kind of,
no question,
in essence, make each other better agents because of their interactions together.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, they kind of level each other out, and I do like you were saying, I really like the aspect of, you as the moviegoer are wondering, can he trust her? Should he not trust her? Because I mean, in the grand scheme of things, she is a spy. Like, that is what she is. That's what she's was made to do. That's what she was trained to do. And you get a little bit of that in the opening sequence when she's nowhere to be found, and it turns out that she's, backing up some information that the ship had.
She's got a side mission. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And she even points to it. He said, that's not, that wasn't the mission. She's like, well, that wasn't your mission. That was my mission,
Right.
Which complicates things in a good way.
Yeah, I think so too. And this is basically this kind of the first buddy movie in the MCU, and you get that a little bit later on where they're like, "Hey, why don't we throw Hulk over in Thor Ragnarok?" Where they again pair off a couple of heroes in a single heroes movie, and just the fact that he's very virtuous and all of that, and she's much more overtly sexual and worldly and that kind of thing. So there's also that tension between them where you're like, are they gonna is something gonna happen between the two of them?
That's true.
Where there's sort of those moments that they then reference in Age of Ultron when she's flirting with Hulk, with Bruce Banner, and Captain America's like, oh, I've seen flirting. This isn't that. And he's like, what do you mean up close? Kind of referencing back to this, because that's another way in which they're basically the two most polarized heroes in the Avengers, and the fact that they put them together in a movie is forming kind of an uneasy alliance. I think is a really interesting choice.
Yeah. Yep. I would agree with that, and almost to the point where, like you said, you're kind of wondering, are they going to get together? And then you see Avengers: Age of Ultron, and she starts hitting on Bruce Banner all of a sudden, and you're like, wait, what? Like, I thought she had a thing for Cap. So
that was a little bit of a U-turn. I don't know, and I think you could tell that Joss Whedon's idea of kind of pairing Black Widow and Hulk didn't really go over with fans very much, because they've kind of tried to downplay it ever since.
It was weird.
I think they follow up on it a little bit in Ragnarok, because that's seeing Black Widow on the video screen. Now we're totally talking about something totally different, but brings him back. But
that's all right.
But yeah, they did kind of hint with even though I don't know that Cap and Black Widow are very compatible, for a relationship. Just like I said, they're just so different.
Well, they say odds attract, so
that's true. That's true. I mean, they definitely have. They definitely have a connection and sort of at the very least a mutual respect that I think is strengthened a lot more over the course of this movie. Of course, she's not the only one that comes back. They bring Nick Fury here, and I think this is still probably the most substantive role that they've given Sam Jackson since Avengers. Because he does actually have his own action sequence in the middle of this movie.
Yes, yeah, a really good one too. A really good one. Yeah, I still don't fully understand why. I don't know. I don't know about you, but I can remember when I first watched it, I was like, he's not dead. When he. Sorry for getting into the spoilers part a little soon.
Oh, it's all good. It's all spoilers. This movie's 5 years old. People don't see it right now.
Okay, good. But yeah, when you think he dies because he gets shot in Cap's living room, I'm like, yeah, he's not dead. So him coming back, I don't know if that was supposed to be like this grand reveal that was supposed to catch you in the in the heartstrings, but it didn't for me. But yeah, just another really strong performance. I love Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury.
Yeah, same. The more you know about comic book mythology, the more you're like, yeah, they're not they'll kill them, but then they'll bring them back the next. I mean, how many times has Loki died? And there's still, every time you go on the internet, there's still a billion posts about all the reasons why Loki's not dead. Here's this fan theory and this thing. I think casual moviegoers probably think that maybe he's out of commission, but I mean, obviously it's much more satisfying that he's not, because we get that whole payoff. What did you think about, I guess, not only, we talked about Nick Fury, but the fact that they brought Sebastian Stan back as Bucky, and how they handled the Winter Soldier thing? I actually have not read the arc in the comics about the Winter Soldier arc by Ed Brubaker. I think I wrote that down somewhere. But I'm not super familiar with that. Have you read any of the comics in which this movie is kind of inspired?
It's funny you mentioned that, because I'd like to think I'm a little more knowledgeable than most on comic book, storylines and stuff. But the Winter Soldier was one storyline that I did not know anything about before seeing the movie. So, the last time that you see Bucky in First Avenger. You know, he's this suave-looking fellow, really sharp-looking guy. And then, you know, even his reveal in Captain America Winter Soldier, I was like, who's that? You know, because it took me a minute because, you know, he's got the long hair. When you don't recognize him at first. So, you know, once they say, like, Bucky, you know, is that you? Then you kind of catch on. But Sebastian Stan's performance is great. You know, I'm a big fan of his. I think he plays off this cool guy character really well. And, you know, in this one specifically, he's more the well, obviously he's the sinister, you know, just honed in, because that's all he's thinking about is how do I kill you, you know, how do I finish the mission? So he plays that part really, really well. And then later on in, like, you know, Civil War and Infinity War, he plays a really good, cool guy character alongside Captain America, which, you know, I'm glad that they've worked him in that role for these movies now.
You know, in this movie, he's in full on Terminator mode in this. He's a force of nature that kind of sweeps through. And even though the movie's PG-13, for some reason, I don't know if it's the sound design or what, but there is a certain brutality to the way he handles himself and the way the movie kind of captures his various assassinations and assassination attempts. I mean, even like, you know, he like jumps on the car and just like tosses Sitwell right out of the vehicle while they're talking to him. Just, you know, the fight scenes, even though, you know, it's essentially going to be bloodless because it's a Marvel movie owned by Disney that has to appeal to families in general. They still have to sell toys and things like that. There's a certain intensity to Winter Soldier when he comes on screen that I think they really capture, you know, here, but also in Civil War. Where that you haven't really seen. Like he's in a way he's more evil and more scarier in this movie than most of the villains in a lot of the other films, you know?
Yeah, that's very true. And especially like when he goes back under and Robert Redford's character, you know, sends him back under and gives him the electric chair in his head or whatever it is to jog his memory. You know, his blood scream is really intense. I remember in theaters, it made me like kind of cringe, like, you know, I could feel it, you know, I could feel his pain because he played it off really well. You know, it was really intense.
Do you see it as any kind of, like, how would you reconcile the fact that in this movie, it seems like they just put him in the chair and like reprogram him? Meanwhile, in Civil War, they introduced all the you know, the words, the trigger words.
The homecoming, you know, crash car or whatever.
Which everybody was like, is that a tease for Spider-Man? Because homecoming, freight car, and like all these, So do you think that that's just, we're just now seeing more of his programming process, or do you think that they kind of in the next movie decided to retcon a little bit how they kept him under?
Yeah, I think it was a mixture of two things. I think it was a little intense. You know, I could see if you're a kid watching that movie, how that's kind of scary.
Right.
You know, and like you said, Disney has to appeal to those kids to sell the toys to them. So, but I think the other fact is that more so, you know, it wouldn't have worked in Civil War because, you know, I think they introduced that early. The only reason they introduced it at the beginning of Civil War is so that they can later do it while he's locked up in that chamber, you know, because how are you going to zap him in the chamber when he's locked, you know? So I think it was more of that, just to kind of bend the storyline in their favor,
right?
Make it less complicated. It was a cool kind of tie-in, the fact that he is a Russian, you know, war machine, kind of this, you know, death seeker, and so it kind of plays into that a little more with the keywords, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, no, it works. It's just it does feel a little bit like, oh, you know, those trigger words were there the whole time. We just didn't show you.
Well, maybe too. I mean, I was just thinking about this. Robert Redford, maybe that's the only way he knew how to re-jog his memory. Maybe he didn't know anything about the keywords. I don't know why he wouldn't, but you know, maybe it's a little bit of that.
I love the fact that the consequences in this movie really carry over into Age of Ultron and Civil War specifically, because you know, we got that scene at the end. Like at the end here, not only do we have Cap's announcement over the you know, PA system at S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters that we've been compromised, we've been taken over by Hydra, blah, 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 that factored into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and basically made that an entirely different show. But also Age of Ultron, like they have Hydra kind of on the run. And then in Civil War, they pay off the fact that Black Widow put all this information and like published all of this classified data for Zemo to get his hands on, to figure out how to piece it all together and how to kind of control Bucky. And I love the fact that even though these movies, in a lot of ways, I think people that are more critical of them are like, oh, you know, it's just a superhero movie. There's no like payoff. There's no, they're not building towards anything. None of them really matter. I'm like, well, actually, this kind of plays hugely into the next few movies.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. They do that so well in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Just any action, you better think about your actions because it will come back to haunt you. You know what I mean? And that's just such a cool aspect. Like, you know, it doesn't seem like the story writers really ever forget anything. Right. And they always work it back into into a full circle into, you know, another movie. So, yeah, this, to your point earlier, Winter Soldier is an essential movie to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and where we are now, you know, in the order that, I mean, we're about to get Endgame. So, it's still playing a part. You know, things that happen in Winter Soldier are playing out still in Infinity War and Endgame, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I think it really feeds into the audience goodwill that Marvel has built up over a decade plus, and it rewards repeat viewings. Like, as we've said, you know, at the top of this conversation, both of us have seen this movie several times and are still having this conversation. Like, I'm having this conversation. I didn't get a chance to revisit it before we talked. I'm like, crap, I need to go back and watch it because now I'm remembering how great it is. Like, it's all coming back up. And you know, the fact that it is kind of inspired by those like conspiracy political thrillers of the 70s, more specifically something like 3 Days of the Condor, which again stars Robert Redford. So it knows exactly what genre it's playing into, and he brings that gravitas to this. I mean, he's Robert Redford. The fact that they were able to get him for a Marvel movie is impressive in and of itself. But I think he does predictably a great job in here playing, I guess, kind of the unofficial head of Hydra now. It's unclear if he's running all of Hydra or just a specific initiative of it.
I think so. I mean, you get this. I mean, it speaks to him that your first exposure to him is in this movie, but because of the way he plays it, it feels like you've known him all along. If that sounds weird, his back and forth with Nick Fury at the beginning of the movie.
There's a history there. Yeah,
there's a history there. You know, I'll do this favor for you, Nick, but you got to have Iron Man show up on my grandson's birthday party. You know, that kind of banter makes you feel like he's been there all along, which, you know, I mean, that adds to the depth of the story.
For sure. We haven't really talked about, first to touch with Hydra, I love the fact that they brought Gary Shandling, R.I.P., that they brought him back here to pay off his appearance in Iron Man 2, which now retroactively, there's a lot of things that, you know, Iron Man 2, like Thor the Dark World, is one of the more divisive MCU movies, and I think it is really over-cluttered with a lot of multiple subplots that some of which pay off, some of which don't. But I mean, as time has gone on, I feel like they've retroactively made that movie feel more important to everything. And I think bringing back Gary Shandling here and thinking back to Iron Man 2, where he's really trying to get his hands on the Iron Man technology, it makes sense now that, you know, he was part of Hydra, that, he wasn't trying to get it on behalf of the U.S. government. He was Hydra being like, we need to get our hands on this technology.
Right.
There's a lot of cool things like that, but we haven't even talked about, Sharon Carter, is not that much to say about her in this. She's just kind of planting the seeds more for future appearances more than anything else, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. Maybe we still haven't seen the bulk of her. I've not been overly impressed with her involvement in the MCU thus far. I guess she plays a pretty good part in the Civil War, right? I mean, she gets his gear back for him.
That's true.
But she is the love interest, you know.
Yeah, and she doesn't really get much more to explore other than that, unfortunately, besides the connection to Peggy, obviously. So Falcon was introduced in this as well, and I think Anthony Mackie's so fun in this role. And it's unclear if Steve Rogers steps away for good, if we're going to get someone else taking up the mantle of Captain America, as happens in the comics. I think Bucky and Falcon have both kind of taken up Captain America's name in the comic book runs at different points. So what do you think about Falcon in this movie, the way he was introduced, and would you want to see Anthony Mackie kind of play the next gen Captain America if Steve Rogers is sort of out of the picture? Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd be a fan of either he or Sebastian Stan took it over. But I am a huge... I almost cheered in the theaters when I saw that it was Anthony Mackie, because he gets introduced at the very first, when Captain America's lapping him. So you get that comedic relief right away. But just the kind of the depth of his character. I mean, he's got his own battles, and he's had love and loss as well. And he kind of he connects very well with Captain America. He's essentially a second essentially a second Steve Rogers, I would say, without the powers. But because he's so trustworthy, he was given this suit, and he's just so sick. I mean, he's just flying around. He plays it off really well. I had seen Gangster Squad not too long before this, so I was introduced. I think that was the first Anthony Mackie film I saw, or at least where I fell in love with him. And then you get him introduced really early on in this one, and he just does a really good job. I mean, he gels well with even Black Widow. He has, the vague back and forth that they have as well. He just fits right in with the rest of the cast.
Yeah, and it shows to Cap that he can find sort of, he can find commonalities and find kindred spirits in 2014, in the way that he was, friends with Bucky in the 40s, which leads to that really fun dynamic in Civil War where Bucky and Falcon are kind of like frenemies, sort of, they're buddies, but not really. And that's something that I think Marvel really keyed in on, that fans responded to, because we're supposed to get on Disney Plus the Bucky Falcon kind of limited series or whatever. So that should be interesting to see them play out that relationship even more so. But I agree. Anthony Mackie's really fun in here, and I think it would make a lot of sense to have him be Captain America. Whether or not they do that, I think that they left themselves a lot of options. And the fact that they have someone as charismatic as Anthony Mackie in this part, I think, really makes it feel wide open that no matter what they do in the wake of Steve Rogers' absence, whatever that means, I think that they're kind of, they have multiple solid choices in front of them. It's not, well, this is the way we have to go, and that's it. It's like, well, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, and everybody be happy any way we slice it. So
yeah. I think he is a more natural fit, especially the movie adaptation of him is a more natural fit into the Captain America if they go that route rather than Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes taking that role in the movie. Because I just don't think that Sebastian Stan's character has that, steady morality to him.
Right.
And that Anthony Mackie has. You know what I mean? Anthony Mackie, the Falcon that Falcon has.
It's also, it reminds me a little bit of something like The Dark Knight Rises, where the whole Joseph Gordon-Levitt character's arc is to demonstrate to audiences, like, look, he's been through stuff like Bruce Wayne. Look, he doesn't like guns like Bruce Wayne. Look, literally kind of basically incept you with the idea he would be a good Batman replacement, right? So it kind of feels in that way like Falcon's. It would just be an easy transition for him to be like, all right, I'll take off my wings and put on, put on the shield instead. So yeah, I think that if they go that route, I think that would be a wise decision. Also, I think one part of this movie that I feel like they introduced really strongly and then kind of quasi dropped the ball on a little bit is the Crossbones character, and the fact that he's introduced in this. It's basically an origin story for that character, that by the end of it he's basically on the verge of becoming Crossbones from the comics, and then he's spoilers, he's in Civil War for 5 minutes before he blows up. How do you feel about his introduction in this movie, and then the way that they, I guess, didn't pay off that introduction in the next film?
Yeah, I think you expect a little more of an appearance in a film later on because he had such a big involvement in Winter Soldier. You know, he's kind of a worthy adversary in Winter Soldier, and then like you said, you know, his ultimate goal is just to blow up in Civil War. But I think in the bigger picture, he plays a pretty important role because he makes all the Avengers see in Civil War that, hey, you know, kind of opens their minds to the fact that, hey, you know, you've been thrashing about, you know, saving, like taking down these villains. That's great. But what about these other people? Like, Crossbones, he got damaged in Rebel, left for dead, you know, and then, I can imagine that ever since he's been trying to get to Cap and get in front of him only to, you know, prove his point that, you know, you're not saving us the way you think you're saving us. You know, you're hurting us too. So I think for that reason, Crossbones' involvement is essential, but I would have liked to see more of him.
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely need a character to make that point to the Avengers that there are consequences. There's always collateral damage, and you're never going to be able to save everyone. It almost makes you wish that they hadn't killed off Baron von Strucker so unceremoniously in Age of Ultron, because maybe he could have filled that role, and then Crossbones could have been sort of working with Zemo for his own purposes. There's definitely a way that they could have handled that a little differently. There's been, it's been reported that Frank Grillo's supposed to be in Endgame, whatever that means, whether that's a flashback or there's a million rumors circulating about that movie, obviously, and I think it's really smart that they haven't really revealed kind of anything in the marketing thus far. I hope it stays that way. I want to go in not knowing really much of what to expect.
Yeah, they throw all fans off the scent. If you've read comic books, you have no idea. If you're just a natural fan that's seen all the movies, you have no idea. Let's just consider the fact that we were all blown away when we saw Infinity War. So, even if you've seen all the trailers, even if you see, you know, the one that they'll release a couple weeks before the film gets released, you still won't have any idea going in, you know, who's left, who's coming back, you know. And even like the trailer we get with Ant-Man, not to go too far off subject.
Yeah, it's very related.
Yeah, but the trailer that we get for Endgame, you see Ant-Man in, you know, the camera where he's saying like, knock, knock, let me in. You know who I am. I don't think he's the only one. I think they cut out other people that are in that scene with him, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think you only see Ant-Man, but I think there's other people there too. Couldn't tell you who, but just instances like that completely throw everybody off the scent. Like nobody knows what we can speculate all we want. Well,
they've taken, you know, deliberate efforts to conceal plot points. There was, for sure, in Infinity War, they had that shot of Hulk on Wakanda running to face Thanos' army. Hulk does not show up in that whole movie. The whole movie, you're like, when's Hulk coming? Here he comes. And
right. I saw him in the trailer.
It never happened. Exactly. Or Civil War, they had the scenes in the airport battle with them facing off, and it wasn't until later that they revealed, hey, Spider-Man's there, by the way.
Yeah.
Things like that. You know, they like to hold, so it wouldn't surprise me at all if we see the movie and Scott Lang is outside standing there with Captain Marvel or something, who found him in the quantum realm.
Oh, that'd be incredible.
I mean, they could go anywhere they want with that. So, I guess kind of to wrap up the Winter Soldier part of the conversation, I like the fact that basically Hydra's big plan is they're developing this algorithm to anticipate any current and future threats, and we get, you know, a name drop for Stephen Strange the first time he's mentioned in these movies.
Yep.
So I like it because it's like, even though we're in this very grounded political thriller, it's basically the most comic booky of plans that the villains come up with.
It sure is.
And I just love the fact that it's posturing itself as this political thriller, which it is very much in a lot of ways, but also has this kind of outlandish and goofy, if you think about it, plot at the center of it. I love that.
Yeah, you definitely scratch your head at it. I mean, Yeah, it's just outrageous. I mean, it's very outrageous when you think about it. It's one of those things where you just kind of have to, oh, okay, let's move on.
Right. I mean, I think it's outrageous in a fun way. If you're like, wow,
Yeah,
that's like,
true.
that's like something, Cobra Commander or something, or the Shredder, like to go back to some of the cartoons from, my childhood and things. I just think that's hilarious. And of course, we get the great Stan Lee cameo. R.I.P. again, as the security guard who finds Cap's uniform from the museum missing. I think that's cool, and it's basically, I guess, Cap's kind of, in a way, it's symbolic of him basically re-announcing himself in a modern context. It's like, oh, here I am in the outfit that you guys remember me in. So I love that.
I love that part, but I also it's a bummer because I love that suit, the Winter Soldier suit. The navy blue one. I think that's probably the coolest one so far. So kind of a bummer that you have to go back, but I get it.
Yeah, it's more of a narrative, like I said, I guess kind of symbolic thing than anything else.
Back to his roots type thing. Yeah.
Exactly. The fact that all his history keeps coming back literally in the form of Bucky. Is there anything specifically, before we get into, closing thoughts, is there anything specifically about this movie that you wanted to make sure that we talked about?
I would say that, not to bring it down a little bit, but, what the only thing that really doesn't work for me is, and it's petty, but I think speaking of like the comic booky stuff, I think some of the Winter Soldier's antics are a little too comic booky. Like when the chase scene, the first chase scene where Captain America is like chasing him down after he shoots Nick Fury. Mm-hmm. He's on the ledge of the building. Cap shows his shield, and like he has his back turned to Cap when he throws that shield. Then all of a sudden he's able to turn completely back, catch it. Yeah, it's like, well, how'd you know he even threw it, and how'd you know where it was gonna, So it's like, it's
right.
It kind of okay. And
they wanted to get that bitchin' shot for the trailer, because I remember that was like the big moment at the end of the trailer where he catches the shield. They're like, whoa.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. Yeah. So I guess to kind of wrap up this particular movie, to me, this really cemented Cap as one of the most interesting Avengers and or heroes in the MCU, and also solidifies his trilogy as one of the best, like the best solo trilogy in the MCU, probably one of the best superhero trilogies in general. Would you agree with
question
that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Because a lot of them usually by the third installment kind of drop off, because I really love Batman Begins, I really love The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight Rises a little less so, and then of course you have the X-Men and Spider-Man trilogies that are usually like by the third installment running out of gas. And like I said, I think it's great how well it works as a trilogy, in spite of the fact that there's Avengers movies between every film. Did you feel at all, as a fan of this movie, did you feel at all kind of disappointed by the fact that, yes, Civil War is great, but it's not really a standalone Captain America movie? It's basically Avengers 2.5. Do you feel like we got robbed of a Captain America movie, or do you think it fits well enough with his overall character arc that it's kind of forgivable?
I think it fits really well, and I think one of the reasons that it's the case, for that reason alone, we're lucky that we've got Captain America in other movies as well, because I don't think Civil War definitely doesn't work if you don't get the tension that builds up between Iron Man and Captain America in every single Avengers film. It's kind of a cool aspect that Iron Man is essentially definitely the
antagonist.
Yeah,
they're on opposing viewpoints, even though we kind of understand where both of them are coming from.
I don't feel like we got. I think we got the best version of a third installment of the Captain America trilogy that we could have possibly gotten. One of the highlights of Civil War for me is the inclusion of Black Panther and Spider-Man. So for that reason alone, I'm glad that everybody was in it. Kind of throws you off the scent a little bit. Maybe there was an opportunity for them to scale back down a little bit and get more of a tactical vibe that we got in Winter Soldier, but I don't feel like we were robbed of anything. I think they did a really good job with it. So
I agree. I mean, part of me does wonder what real true solo Captain America film would have looked like. I remember when they announced Civil War, they did the whole phase 3 lineup that we're now starting to get to the end of with Endgame and Captain Marvel, and they announced Captain America: The Serpent Society, I think it was. And then towards the end, I think they brought out Robert Downey Jr. and they were like, nope, Civil War, and people lost their minds. I'm assuming this was at a Comic-Con. I think it was at SDCC. And so part of me wonders what that would be like. But like I said, I feel like his whole point has been a search for belonging. He finds his place in World War II and then struggles in here and then finds some new allies in this movie. And then Civil War, the family that he's come to know, and his belonging is with the Avengers. He's ostensibly the leader of the Avengers.
Yeah.
So even that kind of fractures, and he has to, at the end of that movie, has to redefine who he is again, and then I guess just kind of embraces the nomad side of his character, and then just has like the secret Avengers running around doing stuff in between that and Infinity War.
Right. Yeah. He. I think that it touches really well. Now that I think about it, now that you say we could have gotten a more scaled down. Maybe Crossbones could have played a bigger part if it was just Captain America and not a whole Civil War thing. That is a shame. But I think, because, like you said, it's just who Captain America is. Like, he's an Avenger, Yeah. So it makes sense that his third movie would be the culmination of that. And, he's been learning this whole time, different things, man at a time, what's right, what's wrong, what he thought is not. You get that in Winter Soldier. And then in Civil War, he's forced to take a stand. Like, enough's enough, I'm not budging on this, and that's where the tension starts to rise and obviously boils over. So that's a really cool aspect. It just kind of comes full circle, really.
Yeah. Is this your favorite MCU film out of all like the whatever 20 something we're at now?
Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. For me, it's in the, I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's in the top 5. It's basically like Avengers, not in any particular order, Avengers Infinity War, Avengers, the original Avenger movie, this Civil War, and Black Panther, are all like swimming around in the top 5 for me. And it's I guess it's telling that 4 out of those movies have Captain America in them. So it just goes to show you that how much of a pivotal part he's been of the MCU to date. I mean, it's really almost all the films feature either Steve and or Tony. So I guess that's a perfect transition. Mm-hmm. Where do we think we're going to leave Steve Rogers when Endgame is said and done?
That's a tough question. I mean,
I know.
I think he dies. I don't think you can write him off into the sunset. I don't think that works. Because you kind of got a little bit of that already. With the end of Civil War, you're like, oh, well, is he done?
Now
so
if you do
it, so if you do that again, I just don't. I don't think. I hope they don't do that because it's not satisfying enough. That sounds wrong because him dying would not be satisfying. But
from a storytelling perspective,
yeah. But if that they're gonna, if they write him off, it's gonna be a very heroic way that he dies. So
for sure,
that would be a beautiful way to end it, in my head, the way that I'm imagining it in my head, because he's going to be saving someone or something noble, that'll make you just, it'll wrap it up really pretty, a nice little bow on top of the present.
And of course there's precedent in the comics where Steve Rogers dies, kind of, I guess, in the wake of Civil War. In the comic books.
Yeah, hopefully he doesn't say Hail Hydra right before he dies.
Yeah, please. I do think that it's part of me feels like Steve Rogers' death is kind of foretold. There's just because in every movie, like he early on before he gets the super soldier serum, he jumps on that grenade on the base because he thinks he's trying to save everyone, and he's sacrificing himself to do so. At the end of the film, he puts the plane in the water to save everyone. It's kind of his move. His self-sacrifice is kind of the thing he does. But I also feel like in a lot of ways, because that's directly from the source material, Captain America's death, that audiences, at least the ones that know the comics, will be really expecting that to happen, kind of like how we're saying now. So I kind of wonder if Kevin Feige and the people at Marvel know that that's what people are expecting and will surprise us and have him not die or have Iron Man be the one to die instead, because I also feel like that whole first Avengers movie is Steve Rogers saying, oh, you only fight for yourself. Now sometimes there's no easy way out of a situation, that kind of thing. Poking fun at his ego and that,
right.
and all that stuff. But then at the end of the movie, Tony Stark is the one to take that missile into space to travel over there to save everyone. Tony Stark is the one that lays his life on the line. So I feel like they've been building towards sort of a sacrificial end for both of them, which makes me wonder if we're going to lose both of them, or if they're going to choose which one they're going to kind of stick around, have Tony Stark kind of hanging out as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. or some other capacity where he's
that would be really cool.
More of a guest player than like leading his own franchise. So I'm definitely curious to see what angle they're going to take with it.
Yeah, if they kill off Tony, it would be disappointing to me that it wasn't in Infinity War, because that would have been. But when Thanos stabs Tony, you're like, whoa, because you didn't think it was going to be him. That you knew someone was going to die, but you didn't know it was going to be him. You're like, oh my god, like they just killed off Iron Man, and then he like freezes it over, and you're like, oh, at least I was like, what, like, that would have been great,
but then they kill half the cast anyway.
Yeah.
5 minutes later, you're like,
and it's not
Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the people who have confirmed sequels coming out though too. So you're like, oh, I mean, he's gonna be back next year. It's like,
right. But I would be disappointed if they killed off Tony, that it wasn't done then. So for that reason alone, I don't think they'll kill off Iron Man. Maybe it will be the end of Iron Man, but not the end of Tony.
Right.
We'll see. Yeah.
Could
go a lot of different ways, for sure.
Oh God, I know. I'm very excited to see what ends up happening with all of these characters, especially Captain America, just because I feel like I'm more invested in his individual story than anybody else.
Yeah, he's easily the one that I'm most attached to.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of all I have for the Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Zach, can you tell people where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, of course. If you want to reach out to me, I'm mostly on Instagram, zmathews7, Mathews with 1 T. And then follow. Be sure to check out Proper Gentleman Podcast. Instagram is Proper Gents Pod. And then, like I said earlier in the episode, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, pretty much wherever you get your podcast fix.
Well, Zach, thank you so much for coming on the Crooked Table Podcast. This was a great conversation. I'll have to have you back sometime.
Yeah, I would love that. This was fun. Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
If you're interested in joining me on the show to chat about one of your favorite films, head on over to crookedtable.com/guest. Or you can consider supporting the show at patreon.com/crookedtable. Of course, you can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Until next time, this has been the Crooked Table Podcast, and I've been Rob.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
That's the yard of a little KED.